Wildfire-Battling the Westhampton Fire, written by deMauro, illustrated by Bruce Armstrong. The date was August 24th, 1995. The place was Westhampton, Long Island in New York. And the weather report on that summer Thursday was bad. No rain again! August had been one of the driest months ever in New York. It had been a great month for sports and picnics, but the dry weather was bad news for trees and plants. In the pine forest, parched trees stood in the dusty earth. Piled around the trees were twigs and fallen pine needles. They were bone dry and ready to burn. Danger was only a spark away. The fire probably began with a lit cigarette that someone tossed away. When the cigarette hit the ground, things began to happen. The dried twigs and pine needles caught fire. Then wind gave the flames oxygen. That helped the fire grow. More wind spread the flames. Soon the fire was a roaring blaze with the whole pine forest to use as fuel. That was the beginning of the biggest wildfire in the state of New York in 90 years. An alarm went out to volunteer firefighters in the nearby towns. Volunteers are trained at rescuing people and putting out fires. But they are not paid for their work. They have other jobs when they're not putting out fires. The firefighters of Westhampton and the other towns were worn out already. For 3 days, they had been battling another pine forest fire about 20 miles away. Some had worked for 48 hours or more without going home. Now they were called to a new blaze. What they found was terrifying. The wildfire was racing through a dry forest. The fire took the shape of a curved line 3 miles across. Winds drove the orange flames forward. Walls of fire reached 40 feet into the air. The fire seemed almost alive. It leaped across highways and railroad tracks. In some places, the roaring flames shot 200 feet in the air, as high as a 20-story building. The sky filled with a cloud of churning black smoke. How could anyone control such a fire? Just pouring water on it would not be enough. There was too much fuel. There were miles of dried out wood and pine needles waiting to burn. The firefighters needed help, and they got it. Fire companies from all over Long Island, New York City, and many other states pitched in. They sent people and equipment. Wildfire experts from the U.S. Forest Service, known as hotshots, came too. They had years of practicing fighting forest fires. At first, the fire was too big to put out. Firefighters tried instead to control the edges of it. They wanted to keep it from sweeping through neighborhoods where people lived, and they wanted to slow it down. Firefighters knew that buildings in the path of the fire could be next to burn. For safety's sake, about 600 people had to stay away from their homes during the fire. Those with no place to go were moved to high schools far from the blaze. There were pets to worry about, too. In one case, a woman was at work when the fire began. Her house was in the area near the fire. She wanted to rescue her dog and cat, but the police said it was too dangerous. Her story, like many others, had a happy ending. Emergency workers were on the lookout for pets left in empty houses. They found the woman's animals and brought them to her. Back at the blaze, firefighters attacked from the air and from the ground. Helicopters carrying giant 250-gallon buckets joined the fight. The pilots dipped their buckets in nearby lakes, then flew to the fire. The pilots dumped the water on hot spots that were giving the ground workers a lot of trouble. Back and forth they flew. At times, the smoke was so thick, pilots had to worry about crashing into each other. Small airplanes also helped. They could take up to 650 gallons of water to drop on the fire. With their view of the whole fire, pilots could guide the workers on the ground. At the fire's edge, workers dug a fire line. This is a strip of ground the fire can't cross. Utilizing bulldozers, picks, and shovels, workers cleared away whatever might burn. Anything that could not be cleared was soaked to help keep it from catching fire. The firefighters worked and worked. At times, the heat was so high they had to back away for a while. In some places, the firefighters stood between the raging flames and people's homes. They poured water and chemical foam on the fire to force it away from those houses. The first day, the fire was winning the battle. High winds were the biggest problem. They fed the fire oxygen and sent sparks flying. The sparks would land beyond the fire and help it spread. By Friday, there were 2,000 volunteers fighting the blaze. They worked on and on. Then they got a break from the weather. The high winds died down. Now the firefighters could make some progress. By Sunday, August 27th, the fire was no longer spreading. Emergency workers finished the fire line. It was a strip 11 miles long and about 8 feet wide with nothing left on it that might burn. However, there was still work to be done, but fewer workers were needed. Some who had come from far away could return home. Some who lived nearby could get some rest. After days of being covered with greasy soot, they were home scrubbing themselves clean. What about the damages? Thanks to the dedicated volunteers, most buildings escaped the fire. One house burned down. 11 others were damaged. So were a lumberyard, a train station, and a tennis club. Most importantly, no one died and no one had been badly hurt. The damage to the pine forest was the greatest. More than 5,000 acres of trees and scrub were burned. If you put 4,500 football fields together, you'd get an area about that big. Surprisingly, tree experts say the fire was a good thing for the forest. Fires are a natural part of the life of a forest. Lightning is a common fire starter. The pine cones needed to be heated by the fire so they could open and let out their seeds. For the animals in the forest, the fire was most dangerous to the slowest. Deer and others that ran quickly could escape. Digging animals could hide in the earth beneath the fire. Birds could fly away. Turtles and other crawling animals had the most trouble getting away. For the future, experts plan to use small fires to prevent big, dangerous ones. They can burn parts of the forest carefully during times where there is plenty of rainfall. The small fires will use up fuel on the forest floor. Then, if the forest catches fire during dry times, it will not burn as badly. Therefore, it will be easier to put out. By the time the last sparks were out, things were nearly back to normal. Most firefighters were back at their regular jobs. Those who had to leave their houses during the fire were home again. In Westhampton and nearby towns, people were especially happy. They were lucky to be safe and they knew it. They wanted to find some way to show firefighters how they felt. On Sunday, October 1st, there was a Heroes Parade in Westhampton. Thousands of grateful people cheered marching firefighters and other emergency workers. Afterwards, the heroes and their families were treated to a huge picnic. Local restaurants and supermarkets donated $35,000 worth of food and drink, 50,000 hamburgers alone. There was music, song, loads of food, and lots of smiles. For the people of Long Island, it was a way of saying, "Firefighters, you did an amazing job. Thanks for everything."